My name is Jessica Monroe. I'm 27 years old, and I live in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And if there's one thing I've learned the hard way, it's that family can break your heart in ways no stranger ever could. This is a story about betrayal, redemption, and a kind of revenge that life itself delivered, without me having to lift a finger. See, I was never the favorite. Not in school, not at home, not even in my own family, especially not when it came to my sister, Heather. She was 3 years older than me and seemed to be born with a spotlight that I could never step into. Blonde hair, green eyes, and the kind of confidence that made people stop talking just to listen to her speak. Meanwhile, I was quieter, more observant, less noticed, and according to her, less lovable. I remember the exact words she said to me when I was 15 and had just cried to her about my first crush ignoring me. She looked me straight in the eye, with that slight smirk she always wore when she wanted to hurt me, and said, "You're not the type that people fall in love with. You're the type that gets left behind." That sentence carved itself into my skin like a tattoo. I carried it with me through high school, through college, through every failed date, and every time I stared at myself in the mirror and wondered what was wrong with me. Heather, of course, had boyfriends lined up like taxis in downtown Detroit. She even got engaged before she graduated from college. It didn't last, but she wore that ring for 6 months like it was a crown. My parents adored her. They didn't even try to hide it. If she got a B on a paper, it was, "She's just too busy with her internships." If I got an A, it was, "Well, let's see if you can keep it up." It wasn't that they hated me, they just didn't see me. Not really. Not in the way I wanted to be seen. Before I share the next part of my story, take a moment to comment your name and where you're watching from. I want to know who you are, because if you're still here, listening to every word, I know you're someone who understands what it means to live through emotional wounds and still keep your heart open. This isn't just a story about family, it's about identity, about survival. And if you stay with me to the end, I promise you'll understand what it truly means to take your life back on your own terms. Don't forget to like and subscribe, because this kind of truth deserves to be heard. So I learned to stay quiet. I built my own little world. I worked hard, got into a solid university, and earned my degree in interior design. I moved back to Grand Rapids and opened a small but stylish studio downtown. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine, and I loved it. I worked with young couples decorating their first homes, restaurants trying to rebrand, even a few quirky Airbnbs that needed personality. I had something of a reputation for turning dull spaces into cozy, vibrant ones. It made me feel useful, even seen, but I was still alone, and I could still hear Heather's voice whenever I got too comfortable. "You're not the type people fall in love with." Then I met Nathan. He walked into my studio one rainy Thursday afternoon. I remember the exact moment because the bell above the door jingled, and when I looked up, he was standing there shaking water from his coat, his dark hair damp, his gray sweater clinging to his shoulders. He had this warm, steady look in his eyes, like he'd been looking for something and just found it. He smiled at me like we already knew each other, and I'll never forget what he said. "Hey, I was told this is where magic happens. I've got an ugly office and no idea what to do with it. Think you can help?" I laughed, actually laughed, and said, "Ugly offices are my specialty." He hired me that day. The project lasted 3 weeks. In those 3 weeks, he brought me coffee every morning. He asked me questions, not just about the work, but about my life, my ideas, my dreams. And he listened, really listened. Not like someone waiting to speak, but like someone who wanted to understand. He was kind, intelligent, funny in a quiet, sarcastic way, and completely different from any man I had ever met. I tried to stay professional. I told myself this was just a job, but the way he looked at me when I talked about my designs, the way he smiled when I got excited about something simple like accent lighting, I started to believe, just maybe, that someone could see me the way I had always wanted to be seen. 3 weeks turned into dinners. Dinners turned into weekends. And within 5 months, we were inseparable. He wasn't just someone I was dating. He became part of my world, my safe place, my anchor. When he proposed, it was quiet. No fireworks, no public spectacle. Just the two of us in my apartment, with takeout boxes on the coffee table, and his grandmother's ring in a little navy box he pulled from his pocket. I cried so hard I couldn't even say yes right away. I just nodded, over and over, until he was laughing and holding me. I was 26, engaged, in love, and for the first time in my life, genuinely happy. Then came Heather. We hadn't spoken much in the past 2 years. She'd moved to Chicago and bounced around jobs, trying to find herself, as she called it. I didn't know much about her life, and she knew even less about mine. But when our parents found out I was engaged, the entire Monroe family decided to celebrate with a weekend dinner. My parents insisted that Heather come. She showed up 20 minutes late, wearing designer heels and a coat that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. She walked into the restaurant like she was walking onto a stage, kissed our parents on the cheek, and barely looked at me, until she saw Nathan. He stood to greet her like the gentleman he was, and extended his hand with a polite smile. "You must be Jessica's sister. It's nice to meet you." I swear, the way her eyes flicked from his face to his watch, to the way he held himself, it was like watching a switch flip inside her. Her whole posture changed. She leaned in when she shook his hand, laughed louder than necessary when he said something mildly funny, and during dinner, she kept turning every topic back to herself, her travels, her friends, her latest startup idea. Nathan was gracious, as always, but I could feel her watching him, testing him, and I knew Heather. I knew that look. After dinner, she pulled me aside in the parking lot. Her tone was sugar-sweet, but her words were sharp. "He's handsome," she said. "Are you sure someone like him wants to be with someone like you?" I stared at her, not because I was shocked, because I wasn't, but because for the first time in my life, I wasn't wounded. I was angry. I smiled. "Yes, I am. And more importantly, he knows exactly who I am. Which is more than I can say for any of the men who left you." Her face went stiff. She blinked once, twice, then walked away. That night, I knew things were going to change, but I didn't know just how far she'd go to try and take what I had. And I didn't know yet that life was about to teach Heather a lesson in loss, and I wouldn't have to do a thing. The days after that dinner were strangely quiet. Heather didn't call, didn't text, didn't even message our mother to give one of her typical debriefs about how everyone worshipped the ground she walked on. I thought maybe she'd just let it go. Maybe the shock of realizing I had a life, one I loved, was enough to keep her distant for a while. But I should have known better. Nathan noticed it first. Subtle things. A string of anonymous emails sent to his company's general inbox questioning his judgment for hiring certain designers. A negative review left under my studio's name from a fake account claiming I was cold and unprofessional, which felt so bizarrely specific, it was almost laughable. We brushed it off at first. I told myself the internet was full of petty people, but then it escalated. One afternoon, I walked into a new client's home to find the woman tense, eyes narrowed as she clutched her phone. "Did you really design that mess in Easttown?" she asked, referring to a property I'd worked on the month before. When I told her yes, proudly, she shook her head. "Someone sent me pictures of it looking like a disaster. Said you overcharged and then disappeared." I stood there stunned. I hadn't heard a single complaint from that client. I pulled up the final photos on my phone, the ones we'd taken after the staging. They were beautiful, elegant, and real. The woman softened eventually, and we went through with the consultation, but I left shaken. I knew that wasn't random. Back home, Nathan sat me down. "Jessica," he said gently, "I think this is your sister." I didn't want to believe it. It felt too cruel, even for her. But deep down, I knew he was right. Heather had always hated being second to anyone, even in a moment that wasn't hers to begin with. She saw Nathan and saw what I had: love, security, purpose. And instead of being happy for me, she saw it as a threat to her narrative, that she was the shining one, the magnetic one, the Monroe who mattered. I didn't know how far she'd go until she showed up at Nathan's office. It was a Monday. I was at a client's house picking out color palettes when he called me. His voice was calm, but I could hear the tension behind it. "Your sister came to see me," he said. "She asked to speak privately." My chest tightened. "And?" "She said she was concerned," he continued. "Said you'd been emotionally unstable lately, that you might be overworking yourself, that you were always prone to fantasy. I froze. She made it sound like you're not well, he added. Like maybe the relationship was built on you clinging to something that isn't real. The room around me spun a little. I sank onto the edge of the client's velvet couch, the sample book slipping from my hands. I couldn't breathe. Nathan was quiet for a moment, then said, I don't know what she's trying to do, Jess, but it's not going to work. She's trying to ruin me, I whispered. No, he said firmly. She's trying to ruin us, and she's not going to succeed. That night, I sat at my desk in the apartment and stared at my laptop screen without seeing anything. My mind was reeling, trying to piece it all together. Every insult Heather had ever delivered like it was a gift. Every time she'd cut me down with a smile. Every moment she reminded me I was never enough. And I realized something. She didn't want my happiness. Not because she needed it for herself, but because she couldn't stand to see someone she deemed less win. The next week, she posted a photo on Instagram, a close-up of a man's hand resting on a wine glass, the caption reading, Dinner with the most captivating man in Michigan. Some women really don't know what they have until it's gone. She didn't tag him, didn't show his face, but the watch on his wrist was unmistakable. It was Nathan's. I stared at that photo for almost an hour, my hands trembling. It wasn't just the caption, it was the game. She wanted people to assume he'd been with her, to start rumors, to cast shadows on what we had. It was malicious, strategic, and deeply, heartbreakingly desperate. I didn't confront her. I didn't call or message or scream. I just showed Nathan. He looked at the photo and exhaled slowly. That was from the night she came to the office. I had a meeting afterward. We grabbed a coffee before I left. She asked me to stay longer, and I said no. She took this without you knowing. She waited until I wasn't looking. I nodded. My throat was tight. My stomach knotted. She's not going to stop. No, he said. But neither are we. That weekend, my parents invited us over for a barbecue. Nathan and I hadn't seen them since the dinner, and part of me wasn't sure it was a good idea. But he insisted. Let's just go. Show up. Be solid. Let her watch us. And we did. We brought dessert, made small talk, laughed at Dad's old stories. Heather arrived late again, this time with a new guy on her arm. Tall, good-looking, vaguely familiar. She acted like she didn't even recognize Nathan, didn't greet me, didn't make eye contact. But I caught her watching us from the corner of her eye the entire time, watching how he reached for my hand when I laughed, how he kissed my temple when I spilled lemonade on my shirt, how he chose me, over and over, in the smallest ways. It was then I realized something even more painful than all her schemes. Heather wasn't trying to get Nathan. She was trying to be me. For the first time, I had what she didn't. Someone who loved me not for my looks or charm or performance, but for who I was at my quietest, most vulnerable core. And she couldn't compete with that. She tried one more thing. 2 weeks later, I got a message request on Instagram from a fake account. It included screenshots of texts supposedly between Nathan and another woman. Flirty, romantic, explicit. At first glance, they looked real. My heart stuttered. But the font didn't match Nathan's actual messaging app. The timestamps were weird, and when I read them closely, I noticed phrases he'd never use, words he'd never say. I showed him. He didn't even blink. These are fake, he said. You know that, right? I nodded slowly. But it means she went this far. He took my hands in his. Then it's time to stop letting her play this game. I deleted the messages, blocked the account, reported it. Then I called Heather. She answered on the third ring, her voice honeyed and smug. Jessica, to what do I owe this rare pleasure? You need to stop, I said calmly. This obsession with tearing me down, it's embarrassing. For you. She laughed, light and sharp. You think you've won, don't you? There's nothing to win, I replied. You can't take what was never yours to begin with. And frankly, I wouldn't wish this kind of emptiness on anyone. But if you keep going, you're going to be very alone. A pause. Then, I was just trying to help you see the truth. No, I said. You were trying to rewrite a story that's not yours. And I hung up. That night, Nathan held me close in bed, his thumb brushing circles on my shoulder. I'm proud of you, he whispered. I didn't do anything brave, I said. Yes, you did, he replied. You stood up for yourself. That's something. I closed my eyes. I felt like something inside me had shifted. Like I had finally taken my power back. Not through revenge, but through truth. And deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. But I also knew I wasn't afraid anymore. It was the morning of our engagement party, and everything felt like it had finally come together. The venue we chose, a charming art gallery downtown, had been transformed with string lights, elegant white and gold linens, and floral arrangements bursting with peonies and eucalyptus. I had spent weeks planning every detail, determined to make it an evening that reflected who Nathan and I truly were: quiet, grounded, deeply in love. I slipped into my dress alone in the dressing room tucked behind the gallery's main floor. It wasn't extravagant, but it felt like me. Soft champagne silk that hugged my figure without demanding attention. Simple earrings. No necklace. My hair in loose waves. For once, I wasn't dressing to impress anyone. I was dressing for joy. Nathan knocked gently on the door before peeking in. "You ready?" he asked with a soft smile. I turned to face him, my heart swelling. "I've never been more ready." He stepped inside and took my hand. "Let's go show them what love looks like." Guests arrived shortly after. Colleagues, clients, college friends, and family. My parents beamed the entire evening, making their rounds and introducing themselves like royalty. My mom pulled Nathan aside at one point and whispered, loud enough for me to hear, "You've made our daughter so happy. Thank you for seeing her." I thought for a moment I might cry. But then Heather arrived. She swept in wearing a floor-length black dress that clung to her body like a second skin. Her lips were painted a shade of red, too bold for the soft candlelight of the gallery. And she wore a necklace I recognized, one she'd stolen from my room in high school and never admitted to taking. It felt like a warning, a declaration. She was coming armed. She hugged our parents, waved to acquaintances, and then walked directly to Nathan and me with the kind of poise that only someone with a hidden agenda could wear. "You two look lovely," she said smoothly, eyes flicking over me like I was a second-choice menu item. "This whole thing is surprisingly elegant." "Thanks," I replied, standing straighter. "We planned it ourselves." Her gaze lingered on Nathan. "I always knew you had taste," she said to him, her voice low. He didn't take the bait. "Jessica has impeccable taste," he said, squeezing my hand. "She made all the decisions. I just follow her lead." That should have ended it. But with Heather, there was always another play. She mingled throughout the evening, laughing a little too loudly, inserting herself into conversations that weren't hers, complimenting Nathan's coworkers with practiced charm. But something about her felt off. There was a restlessness in her movements, like she was trying to work up the courage to do something bigger. I kept one eye on her all night. Then came the moment. It was late. Most of the guests had left, and the gallery had begun to quiet. Just a few close friends remained, sipping champagne and helping clean up. Heather, of course, was still there, pretending to help rearrange table centerpieces while watching Nathan from across the room. I was in the back speaking to the event coordinator when I heard raised voices. One of my friends came rushing over, eyes wide. "Jess, you need to come out here. It's your sister." My stomach dropped. I hurried to the main room to find Heather standing far too close to Nathan, one hand resting lightly on his chest. Her voice was slurred, not drunk, but performative, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Come on, Nathan," she said, pouting. "You can't honestly tell me you're happy settling for someone like her." Time stopped. Nathan took a full step back, his eyes dark with something I'd never seen before. Fury. "Don't ever touch me again," he said quietly but firmly. "And don't ever speak about Jessica like that." She laughed, high and brittle. "Oh, please. You know you could have anyone. You deserve someone who shines, not someone who blends into the wallpaper." I walked straight into the middle of them, heart pounding. "What do you think you're doing?" Heather turned to me, her face flushed. "Telling the truth. He's mine. He just doesn't realize it yet." "No," Nathan said. "What you're doing is humiliating yourself and hurting your sister." Again, the room was silent. All eyes were on us. "You've spent your whole life trying to convince everyone you're the star," I said, my voice trembling but clear. "But the truth is, Heather, you're just lonely, and you can't stand to see someone else happy." Her eyes flashed. You wouldn't even have him if I hadn't driven you to want more. You were pathetic before me." I smiled. It wasn't cruel. It was sad. "No, I was just quiet. You mistook that for weakness." Nathan stepped beside me. "This ends now." Heather's mask cracked. She looked around at the few remaining guests, saw their disapproval, their judgment, and for the first time, I saw panic in her eyes. She'd lost control of the narrative. She fled without another word. Later that night, when Nathan and I were home, curled up in bed with exhaustion pressed into our bones, I whispered, "She really thought she could steal you." He looked at me, tender and unwavering. "Jess, I've never wanted anything or anyone but you." I rested my head against his chest, finally letting the tears come. Not tears of fear or sadness, but relief, because I had survived something so much deeper than just a jealous sister. I had survived years of being told I was unworthy and come out whole. But the real turning point wasn't the confrontation. It wasn't even Heather's humiliation. It came 2 days later. I received an email from her. Just a single sentence. "You've always been better than me, haven't you?" I didn't reply, because I didn't need to. I had finally taken my place, not in her shadow, but in my own light, and nothing she could do would ever pull me back into the darkness. After Heather's outburst at the engagement party and that one-line email that followed, something shifted inside me. Not a sudden awakening, not a dramatic breakthrough, but a quiet, firm unlearning. For the first time in my life, I stopped looking over my shoulder. I stopped measuring my worth by my sister's reactions, or by the twisted games she played to stay center stage. I wasn't a supporting character in her story anymore. I was the author of my own. But moving forward, even when you know it's the right thing, is never easy. There were days I caught myself rereading her email, trying to understand whether it had come from resentment or pain, whether it was an insult dressed as a confession, or the rawest thing she'd ever written to me. I wondered what she expected in return: an apology, a thank you, a moment of validation that she was finally losing the upper hand. I never gave it to her. Instead, I poured myself into my life, into the little apartment Nathan and I were slowly turning into a home, into client projects that made me excited to wake up each morning, and into wedding plans that focused less on spectacle and more on intimacy. We didn't want 100 guests or a ballroom full of strangers. We wanted a small ceremony in a greenhouse just outside the city, with warm lights, soft music, and the people who truly knew us. The guest list was a painful thing to finalize. My parents, of course, assumed Heather would be there. They tiptoed around the subject for weeks, dropping vague comments about family unity and the importance of forgiveness. I knew they meant well, but they didn't understand what it had taken for me to claw my way out of that toxic dynamic, to smile through years of her cutting words and subtle sabotage, to finally stand in a place of self-respect. One night, my mother called me. "She's your sister," she said, softly but firmly. "Whatever she did, you can't just erase her." I sat in silence for a long time, fingers pressed to my temple, trying to steady my breathing. "Mom," I said finally, "I'm not trying to erase her. I'm just choosing not to invite destruction into my future." She didn't understand. Not really. But she said she'd respect my decision. Nathan never pushed me either. He knew better than anyone what it meant to me to feel safe. And Heather? She didn't reach out again. No more messages, no calls, not even a backhanded comment through our mother. It was like she had finally accepted that the story was over, or at least that her role in it was. But healing wasn't as simple as shutting a door and walking away. There were echoes everywhere, triggers I didn't expect. Like the time I was at a boutique trying on dresses and the saleswoman tilted her head and said, "You're so lucky to be marrying someone like him." The way she said it, like I was beneath him, hit me like a punch. I smiled politely, but inside, I crumbled. That voice again, that old, buried whisper, "You're not the type people fall in love with." I cried in the car afterward, not because I believed it anymore, but because I hated that it could still reach me. Nathan found me that night curled up on the couch, mascara smudged, shoulders tense. He didn't ask what was wrong. He just sat down beside me and held my hand. We sat in silence for a long time until I whispered, "Sometimes it still hurts." He looked at me, eyes gentle. Of course it does, he said. But hurting doesn't mean she was right. It means you survived something that tried to convince you otherwise. And I realized that pain, when it's no longer ignored, has less power. When it's named, it begins to loosen its grip. I started journaling every morning. Not long, elaborate entries, just 5 or 10 minutes of whatever came to mind. Sometimes it was about work, sometimes about Nathan, sometimes about the girl I used to be who didn't know how to speak up for herself. I wrote letters I never sent, memories I stopped sugarcoating, patterns I recognized only now with distance. And little by little, I started to forgive myself. Not Heather, not yet, but myself. For all the years I stayed quiet, for letting her voice echo louder than my own, for believing her when I should have walked away. Then, something happened I didn't expect. I got a message from one of Heather's old friends, someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Her name was Cassidy, and she reached out through my business page asking if we could meet. I almost ignored it, but something told me to go. We met at a small cafe near the river. She hugged me, hesitant at first, then sat down with a sigh that carried weight. "I know this is strange," she said, wrapping her fingers around her mug, "but I've been meaning to talk to you for a long time." I raised an eyebrow. "About what?" "Heather," she said. "About what she did, and what she's still doing." My stomach tightened. "Still?" Cassidy nodded. "I don't talk to her much anymore, not after the way she treated some of our friends, but I found out recently that she's been telling people that Nathan left you, that you had some kind of breakdown." I swallowed hard. "Why would she?" "Because," she interrupted gently, "she needs to be the one people feel sorry for. She can't handle the idea that you're happy without her, that you became someone stronger after she tried to break you." I felt the burn behind my eyes again. Not tears exactly, more like fire, a different kind of pain. One that wasn't about her anymore, but about what it meant to finally be free. "I don't know what to say," I murmured. "You don't need to say anything," Cassidy replied. "I just wanted you to know, and to tell you that I admire you. You're not like her. You never were." That moment didn't erase everything. It didn't fix the years. But it gave me a mirror I hadn't held before. One that reflected a version of myself, not just surviving, but growing. The next few weeks were filled with wedding details and work milestones. I completed a project for a nonprofit that ended up featured in a local design magazine. Nathan and I finalized our vows, simple and honest, words that felt like home. I started sleeping better, smiling more, laughing without hesitation. And then, one night while walking home from dinner, Nathan stopped me under a street lamp. "You've changed," he said, brushing a strand of hair from my cheek. I tilted my head. "In a good way. In the best way," he replied. "You walk taller. You breathe deeper. You've let go of something heavy, Jess. And I see you now, fully." I leaned into him, closing my eyes. "I think I finally see myself too." And that's when I knew this wasn't just about escaping Heather's shadow. It was about stepping into my own light and letting it grow, steady and real, without needing her approval or her permission. It wasn't about revenge. It was about freedom. The morning of our wedding felt like the soft hum of a long-awaited melody finally reaching its crescendo. The sun filtered through the high glass ceiling of the greenhouse, bathing everything in a golden, delicate glow. The scent of fresh lilies and garden roses clung to the air, mingling with the sound of string instruments tuning softly in the corner. It was quiet, but alive, full of the kind of anticipation that comes with knowing your life is about to change forever, and this time, in the most beautiful way. I stood in front of the mirror in the bridal suite, my dress perfectly fitted, my hair tucked in loose waves pinned with simple pearl clips. My makeup was minimal, enough to highlight what already felt radiant. I didn't feel nervous. I felt grounded, like every step I had taken, every heartbreak, every insult, every quiet victory, had brought me here, not to be rescued, not to be chosen, but to stand beside someone who saw all of me and chose me anyway. There was a knock at the door. It was my dad. He entered slowly, eyes wide, jaw clenched just enough to betray how emotional he really was. "You look," he shook his head. "I don't even have the words." I smiled and walked to him. "Thank you for being here," He hugged me, tighter than he ever had before. You deserve this, Jessica. All of it. There were no photographers rushing us. No chaos. Just soft laughter, the rustle of silk, the flicker of sunlight through leaves. It was the wedding I had always wanted. Simple. Honest. Ours. And then the first crack appeared. It happened just minutes before the ceremony. I was alone in the suite again, sipping water and breathing slowly when my friend Camille burst in, breathless and pale. Her face was twisted with something between confusion and fury. "She's here," she said. I blinked. "What?" "Heather. She just showed up. She's at the entrance. She said she's here to make things right." My throat tightened. "What did you tell her?" Camille looked hesitant. "The staff didn't know to keep her out. She's standing with your mom right now. I think your mom told her to just stay quiet and sit in the back." Of course she did. Of course my mother, ever the peacemaker, couldn't bear the thought of confrontation, especially not on a day like this. I stood still for a long moment. I could feel my heartbeat behind my ribs, not fast, but strong. "Certain. I'll handle it," I said. I walked calmly down the stone path toward the entrance, the skirt of my dress trailing softly behind me. There she was, dressed in a blush-colored gown far too bold for a guest. Her lips painted the same venomous red I remembered from the engagement party. My mother stood next to her, flustered and wringing her hands. "Heather," I said evenly. She turned. "Jessica, you look beautiful." I studied her. Her posture was perfect, her expression serene, but her eyes, they were frantic, searching, hollow. "What are you doing here?" "I came to make peace," she said. Too sweet, too fast. "It's your wedding day. I didn't want to miss it." "You weren't invited." "Because you're still angry," she said, tilting her head. "But I thought today might be the day you could forgive me." I glanced at my mom, who opened her mouth to say something, but I lifted my hand gently. "No," I said, turning back to Heather. "You didn't come to make peace. You came to make a scene, or to be seen, which is all you've ever really wanted." She flushed, a flicker of something ugly crossing her face. "You've spent years cutting me down," I continued. "You've lied about me, tried to sabotage my business, tried to manipulate the man I love, and now you want forgiveness like it's a performance." She narrowed her eyes. "I made mistakes, but I'm still your sister." "No," I said quietly. "You're a stranger who shares my blood, and today I choose peace. Not by letting you in, but by keeping you out." I turned to the security guard standing nearby. "She's not on the guest list. Please escort her out." Heather's mouth opened, a dozen words scrambling to find their way out, but none of them came. She looked stunned, like she'd rehearsed a dozen outcomes in her head, and this wasn't one of them. As they walked her out, she glanced over her shoulder one last time, and I didn't look back. The ceremony went on without a hitch. I walked down the aisle to the sound of soft strings and the sight of Nathan standing beneath a canopy of green and white, his eyes locked on mine, shimmering with unshed tears. Every step felt like a reclamation. Every breath was a goodbye to the girl who had doubted herself, who had bent under the weight of someone else's bitterness. We exchanged vows that were written from scratch. His voice didn't shake. Mine did, but only because every word came from a place I'd once believed I'd never reach. I told him I chose him not because he saved me, but because he walked beside me until I remembered how to save myself. When we kissed, the room melted into light and warmth. At the reception, people danced under strings of golden bulbs. We ate, toasted, and laughed until our cheeks hurt. It was everything I had never believed I could have. Not because it was perfect, but because it was real. Later that night, long after the guests had gone home and the music had faded, Nathan and I stood barefoot on the back patio of our hotel suite, wrapped in a blanket, looking out at the quiet city. He handed me a glass of champagne and asked, "How do you feel?" I took a sip and smiled. "Like I'm home." He nodded. "Do you regret asking her to leave?" "Not for a second." "I was proud of you," he said, "the way you handled it." I leaned my head against his shoulder. I wasn't angry, I just didn't need her anymore. Not her approval, not her attention, nothing. He kissed the top of my head. "You never did." I closed my eyes and let the silence wrap around us. For the first time in my life, I was not the forgotten sister. I was not the shadow. I was not the girl holding her breath, hoping to be noticed. I was a woman who had survived cruelty, who had chosen grace without sacrificing her strength. I had protected my peace, my future, and the love I had built with my own hands. And in doing so, I had become someone even I was proud of. The morning after our wedding, I woke up wrapped in warm sheets, the scent of garden roses still clinging faintly to my hair, and the weight of the past no longer pressing on my chest. There was something new in the air, a stillness, a softness, that felt like peace. Not the kind of peace that comes from silence or escape, but the kind you earn. The kind that grows inside you after years of learning what to let go of and what to hold sacred. Nathan was still asleep beside me, his hand loosely tangled with mine under the blankets. I watched him for a long time, memorizing the quiet rise and fall of his breathing, the curve of his shoulder against the light. For so long, I had believed I was destined to be alone. That love was something fragile and unreachable, reserved for girls who sparkled louder than I did. But there he was, my partner, my witness, my reminder that love, when it's real, doesn't need an audience to shine. We spent the next few days tucked away in a small lake house in northern Michigan. Just us. No phones, no headlines, no family drama buzzing in the background. We read books by the fire, cooked simple meals, took long walks along the wooded trails behind the house. We didn't talk about Heather, not once. Not because we were pretending she hadn't existed, but because she no longer dictated the terms of our lives. I think that's when I realized the true meaning of closure. It doesn't come with a confrontation or an apology, or even a dramatic ending. It comes when you stop needing any of it. When your story continues even though someone else's never grew past the same bitter chapter. When the loudest voice in your head is finally your own. 3 weeks after the wedding, I received a letter. It came in a pale blue envelope, my name written in that unmistakable cursive that had once labeled my school notebooks with petty insults and sticky notes that read things like, "Try harder," or "Don't embarrass me." I hesitated before opening it. For a moment, I considered tossing it out unopened. But curiosity has a way of lingering. Inside was a single page. "Jessica, you don't have to respond. I'm not writing for that. I just want you to know that I saw you. At your wedding, at the altar, in the way people looked at you, in the way he looked at you, and it hit me that I don't know you at all anymore. I don't know when that happened. I used to think I was the one people remembered, the one people chose. But you built something. Without me, without needing me. Maybe that's why I tried to tear it down. Maybe it was easier to destroy it than admit I couldn't do the same. You don't owe me anything. I just wanted to say it. You won." Heather, I read the letter twice, then a third time, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel angry with her. I didn't even feel triumphant. I felt a little sad, because that letter wasn't really about me. It was the first honest thing she'd written in years, but it was still about her reflection in the mirror, about her inability to understand that love doesn't arrive with applause. It grows quietly, like roots beneath the surface. I didn't write back. I didn't tell anyone I had received it. I just folded it gently, placed it in a drawer in my nightstand, and moved on. Life, as it turns out, has a beautiful way of unfolding once you stop clinging to the weight of your past. My business grew, slowly at first, and then in waves. Word of mouth from happy clients led to more projects, and within a year I had to hire 2 assistants to help manage the schedule. I even started mentoring a few young designers, quiet girls who reminded me of who I used to be, always second-guessing themselves, afraid their ideas weren't loud enough to matter. I told them the truth. You don't have to be the brightest light in the room to create something unforgettable. You just have to believe in your own. Nathan thrived in his own way, too. His company launched a new branch, and he finally started pursuing the nonprofit work he'd always dreamed about, helping underfunded schools redesign their classrooms to inspire creativity and warmth. We supported each other in every way, not just as husband and wife, but as best friends, as teammates, as people who had walked through storms and learned to dance in the quiet afterward. We traveled, Paris in the spring, Oregon in the fall, long drives up the coast with the windows down and nothing on our minds but each other. We turned moments into memories, days into home. And sometimes, when I looked in the mirror, I could still hear that old voice, that cruel whisper, "You're not the type people fall in love with." But now, it was just an echo, distant, powerless, a line from a chapter that no longer defined the story. One rainy evening, I found myself standing in our kitchen, barefoot in pajamas, music playing low in the background, while Nathan stirred pasta on the stove. He glanced over and smiled, flour dusted on his shirt from the garlic bread he'd just pulled from the oven. "What?" he asked, amused. I walked over, wrapped my arms around his waist, and whispered, "Thank you." "For what?" "For proving her wrong." He turned to face me, his hands warm on my cheeks. "You proved her wrong the moment you stopped believing her." I kissed him, slow and sure. And in that moment, I understood something I wish I could tell the girl I used to be. You don't need to chase love. You just need to stop running from yourself. Because when you finally choose you, the real you, the right people find their way. Not because you begged them to, but because they see your light, and they stay. I didn't win by taking something from my sister. I won by refusing to let her take me from myself. 2 years later, I stood in front of a full-length mirror in a room flooded with morning light, brushing my fingers gently over the soft curve of my belly. It was still early, just barely showing, but I could feel the change. A quiet, sacred shift beneath my skin, life growing, steady and unseen, like all the most important things in my world had always started. Nathan entered the room, towel slung over his shoulder, hair damp from the shower. He saw me standing there, hands cradling something invisible to anyone else, and stopped. His expression softened into something reverent. He crossed the room and placed his hand over mine, fingers warm and sure. "She's going to be just like you," he whispered. I smiled. "Strong and kind," he said, "and brilliant, and soft in ways that don't make her weak, just like her mom." Tears welled in my eyes, not from fear, not even from joy, but from something deeper, gratitude. That after everything, after all the times I had doubted that I was worthy of being loved, of building a life, of creating something that mattered, this was where I had landed. In a home that smelled like coffee and basil, where laughter echoed off the walls, where the silence was never heavy or tense, but comfortable. A home where no one needed to prove they were enough. My studio had expanded into a full design firm, and we'd just opened a second location. I led a small team of women who were all fiercely creative and deeply empathetic. We designed spaces with soul, warm textures, personal touches, stories tucked into every corner. I had stopped chasing magazine spreads and started chasing meaning. Our work wasn't about being trendy. It was about making people feel safe, seen. That was what had always mattered to me, even before I had the words for it. One afternoon, I received a message from a woman named Elise. She was a therapist who ran a center for young women recovering from emotional abuse. She asked if I would be interested in designing the group therapy room, not for a large fee, just a contribution from someone who understood what it meant to rebuild. I said yes before she could finish the sentence. When I walked into the space for the first time, it was bare. White walls, fluorescent lights, mismatched furniture that looked like it had been pulled from garage sales. But as she talked about what the room represented, what the girls there had gone through, something inside me lit up. I saw colors, shapes, possibility. I went home that night, opened my sketchbook, and filled 6 pages with notes. Soft lighting, earth tones, walls painted with stories instead of slogans, a library corner with cushions and blankets, a table with journals, not rules, mirrors that didn't lie. I wanted it to feel like exhale, like coming up for air after being held underwater for too long. When we finished it, Elise walked into the room and wept. "This is what healing looks like," she said. "It's not loud. It's not perfect, but it's real." I nodded. "That's how I learned to build things," I said quietly, "from broken pieces." She asked me that day if I would consider speaking at one of their workshops, not as a therapist, not even as a designer, but as a woman who had come out the other side. I hesitated at first. I wasn't a speaker. I didn't have the polished, rehearsed story. But then I thought of all the times I'd sat in silence, wishing someone would say out loud what I had been too afraid to name. So I said yes. And when I stood in front of that group a few weeks later, Hands trembling, voice low, I told them the truth, that I had once believed I was unlovable, that I had once let someone's voice dictate the shape of my self-worth, that I had once thought survival meant shrinking. And then I told them how wrong I had been. After the talk, a young woman with tear-streaked cheeks came up to me. Her name was Arya. She hugged me tightly and whispered, I didn't think anyone else knew how it felt. I held her and said, we don't need to be loud to be powerful. A few months later, I received an unexpected call from my mother. She wanted to visit, just for a weekend. She didn't ask if Heather could come. She didn't mention her name at all. I agreed, cautiously. When she arrived, something in her seemed quieter, more reflective. She walked through the house like it was a museum of my becoming. She stopped to admire the nursery we were preparing. Soft sage walls, delicate art pieces, a rocking chair I'd picked out with Nathan that reminded me of the one my grandmother used to sit in. This is beautiful, she said softly. I want her to feel safe, I replied. My mother nodded. I don't think I ever really understood what safe meant for you. Not until now. She sat on the edge of the bed, hands clasped in her lap. I used to think keeping the peace meant keeping everything together no matter what. But sometimes peace means letting things break, letting them go. I sat beside her. We didn't cry. We didn't rehash every wound. But in that silence, something unspoken passed between us. Not absolution, not apology, just recognition. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low behind the trees and cast long shadows across our backyard, Nathan joined me on the porch swing. He placed his hand gently on my belly, then turned to me with a look I had come to cherish, a mix of awe, gratitude, and something fierce and protective. Do you think she'll ever meet Heather? He asked quietly. I was quiet for a long moment. Then I said, maybe one day, if Heather ever becomes someone worth knowing. He nodded. And if she doesn't? I looked out at the sky. Then our daughter will know what love looks like. And that'll be enough. We sat in silence after that, the kind that speaks more than words ever could, and I thought about how far I'd come, from the girl who used to cry in bathroom stalls because her sister made her feel invisible, to the woman who built a life so honest, so steady, that even shadows couldn't survive in it. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need Heather's approval, or anyone's. I had love, I had peace, and I had myself, not despite everything I'd been through, but because of it. And as I placed my hand over Nathan's and whispered to the child growing inside me, I knew that she would never carry the same wounds. Not if I could help it. Not if I kept building, one soft brick at a time, a world where she could grow, not prove, because this was never about winning. It was about becoming. And I had finally become the woman I needed all along. Have you ever been told you weren't good enough by someone who was supposed to love you? Share your story in the comments. If my journey touched something inside you, please like and subscribe to hear more stories about healing, growth, and rising above the voices that tried to break us. Send this to someone who needs a reminder that quiet strength is still strength. And remember, your peace, your truth, and your worth are not up for debate, no matter who tries to challenge them. Thank you for listening to my story.